So, course, funeral ministry training. Here's a photo of my favourite gravestone from Bradfield churchyard, where my wife is strongly involved as a self-supporting ordained minister, and I'm partly involved, although I tend to wander around different parishes, filling in gaps, as it were. But anyway, if you walk up the path to Bradfield, one of the old flagstones now, it's been put down to flagstone, is this: "Here lieth the body of Joseph Beaver, who died." Which is the most concise epitaph I've ever seen. I mean, there's no date, no family, there's no no sort of nice words about him, no Bible verse, no nothing. And when you have an imagination like mine, all kinds of things trigger. Was Joseph Beaver so boring that there was really nothing else to say about him? Or was he so dubious and dodgy that it was best not to say anything about him? Or did the stonemason go broke or run off with the vicar's daughter and suddenly leave this half-finished job? You know, an imagination like mine comes with all kinds of scenarios. But anyway, hopefully there is more to say than just that when it comes to funerals. So that's what we'll be kind of working on in this pilot course. Why don't we just begin with a moment of quiet? We'll just commit things to God in prayer and then move on from there. We can get these slides. There we go. Let's take a moment just to be quiet. God of grace, thank you for another day of grace in our lives. Thank you for each other, for this place and this opportunity that lies before us in this course. We commit to you those we've left behind, anybody who's particularly on our mind at the moment. And we commit to you this time that we have together. We pray, be with us in our thinking, our speaking, our listening, our learning together. The collect for this week. Lord, we beseech you mercifully to hear the prayers of your people who call upon you, and grant that they may both perceive and know what things they ought to do, and also may have grace and power faithfully to fulfill them. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Amen. So we'll just do a few preliminaries, a few sort of details, and maybe the first one would be just who's in the room, what brings you here. So just briefly give us your name, where your church base is, and then a couple of sentences of why you are here on a nice sunny Saturday morning when you might be somewhere else, and then we'll go on from there. So I'm Bill Goodman. As I mentioned, church base at the moment is at Bradfield, which is the westernmost rural part of the diocese. Although I wander around on Sundays, filling in gaps in different churches. And why am I here? Well, we've had a sense for a while that funeral ministry might be an area in which we can do more to develop lay ministry. And so I was given the nudge to try and work on that. And I looked at what others have done. Some other dioceses have done this ahead of us. So learn from them. And we've devised this pilot course. So that's me. Why don't we, let's go around from here. And, yeah.
I'm Elizabeth Cooper. I'm at St John's Church Park. I am a reader, and I thought it would be helpful to know a little bit more about taking a funeral service. Taking part in funeral services, but never.
Right. Thanks.
Holiday from St John's Church in Guild. The church warden, but I don't think that particularly fits this kind of role. But we're just explaining to Elizabeth, we have an awful lot of funerals at our church, and the idea of them is to grow the lay kind of ministry and get people involved in doing other roles and just coming to worship every week. This role attracted me. I sort of feel like I can give some of the skills that I've amassed over a life experience to it. See how it goes.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm Barbara Dargan. I'm from St John's in Goole as well. I used to teach, with half of my role be involved with the community and working with adults and children within the community. And I've always felt empathy towards people in situations that are difficult. And I felt within the church that I could offer something in this area.
That's Barbara, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Yeah.
Simon Clark, I'm based at Thansco, church warden there, just finished the foundation course and just become local minister. And during the foundation course, I felt that there was a calling.
My apologies.
There was a calling, and I felt that I have skills of where compassion is needed. I mean,
Thanks, Simon.
Keith Long, I'm from Parish of Gracemay. I'm church warden at Holy Trinity at Cowick and also local minister at Gracemay. I also work for a funeral director. So I think there is a call in there somewhere within as backup, probably when at the minute the parish was quite well covered, but there could be a time when it's not. And it's that eventuality that we're looking at in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Keith. Yeah.
Kate Moore, I'm lay reader and vocal minister at St John Baptist Quarter. I've been a lay reader since 2013. I've done quite a few funerals, mainly close family. I just really wanted some more training and backup.
Right. Yep. Just arrived at the back.
Hi there. First of all, apologies for interrupting. My name is Joe Pritchard. I'm a lay reader at St Mary's Waltley.
Yep.
I felt a calling towards end of life ministry and change of life ministry in general over my time there. And I've been involved with 3 or 4 funerals now in varying capacities, and I really felt that I wanted to just get myself some formal guidance and awareness of anything that I'm not aware of. I've had good support from my parish, and fortunately in Walkley we seem to be long-lived beasties, so they are. But yeah, most recent funeral I did was about 2 months ago.
Right.
And that was with one of our parishioners who I was quite close to in terms of evening services and that he always used to attend. So
yep. I
wanted to be involved in that.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And you managed to get in without me letting you in, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Was the door on the latch?
I kind of followed the voice.
But was the door on the latch, the external door?
Yeah, the door on the external door was on the latch.
Ah, okay.
And then I wandered through the library and
found your way round.
In through the back door.
Can I just ask, could you just nip back and make sure that door isn't
yes.
anymore? Because it shouldn't have been. So it's a problem with that door. It doesn't shut properly. If you can just shut it too, and then we'll bring you up here on this table. That's right. So you're
that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Let me just grab another chair. Discounted. Actual numbers. So if we can squeeze Joe in there. Great. So who's next? Oh.
Yeah, Chris Lim, reader from Christchurch, Pittsburgh. I've never actually done a funeral. I've spoken at a few, done a few.
Yes, I was heavy-handed enough to make sure it got.
Thank you. Come on up here anyway and join next to Chris. Yeah, yeah. So you haven't done a funeral, Chris?
I haven't yet, no. Yeah, I just thought perhaps it's something which I should learn about and
Explore, yes, possibility, yes. And obviously you've been in touch with your incumbent as all of us have in terms of that. Yeah, great.
I'm Kate Stalker from the Rivers team, which is Tinsley, Catford, that area anyway. So I got involved in funeral ministry as a verger after COVID when some of our vergers were not capable of doing that anymore. And I've been vergering since then. And we pretty much exclusively have one of our readers who does all of the funerals, so none of the clergy really do them, and none of the other readers will do them. So it's just one member of the lay that does them, and we get quite a lot. So I was asked by our team rector if I would come on this course and hopefully take some of the pressure off of her, so that she's not the only person doing them.
Yeah. Right. Thank you, Kate. Yeah.
Hi, Ian Watson, reader at St John's Chapeltown, and I've just recently retired. Got my bus pass last week, very good. So therefore gives me some time and scope to actually concentrate on things, and I have been interested in actually serving older people and also dealing with funeral ministries. So I've done 2 funerals in my life. The first one of which was rather eventful. It was my wife's uncle, who was, bless him, a little bit of an awkward cuss in his life. And when we came to do the funeral, it was a cremation at Grenoside, and we got to the point where you pressed the button to shut the curtains, and the curtains wouldn't shut. And my wife turned around and said, "Well, that's typical Uncle Ian, and if he ain't going to do anything, he ain't going to do it." So that was some time ago.
So you've already got some experience of funerals, which some of us have, some of us haven't, and that's fine. Yep. Great. Thanks, Ian. And Joe?
I'm Josie Freed. I'm a Doncaster minister. I've just moved there from Walmsworth. I'm on the discernment pathway, hopefully for ordination training to start next year. I've been the mourner at a lot of funerals. Far too many, and I think there's just something about finding comfort in the more efficient role than in the mourner.
Yeah, very different role. Well, yes, that relationship is an interesting one, where when you're the efficient, you're not the mourner, although you still engage with it. So yeah, that's a complicated dynamic. Yeah. Thank you, Joseph. And then round the side here, Mark.
So I'm Mark Nurett. I have a range of roles that relate to healthcare chaplaincy, both within the diocese and then more invited.
So Mark is one of our team of presenters, along with Michael.
My name is Michael Toll. I've recently completed a curacy in the parish of Great Snaith. I'm not really based anywhere at the moment. I'm waiting for another appointment, so I'm one of the others that are doing the floating around covering job. I'm SSM, and I've been a funeral director in Doncaster for just coming up 20 years now. And I am here again because Bill invited me.
So I'm Sarah Morn. I'm the rector at St Helens in Thurnscoe, and it's an area where funerals, thankfully, are very much community based. So we take a lot of funerals, often I can have up to 10 at a time, and that's the most, and that was hard. But I'm here because Bill invited me.
Nobody says no to your invitation.
Well, yes. I've been very grateful of being able to gather a team of people. And one sadly who's missing is Eleanor Robertshaw from Great Snaith, who also was due to be here today, but she's not able to. She's not well. And one participant who's missing is Jonathan Ligo from Gore, who's got COVID, I believe. So the joys of the season.
You don't know how far down the list Bill had to go before.
I didn't want to see him there.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really great, to have all of you here, and particularly our team presenters as well. I'm really grateful for everyone for giving the time for this course. Just what are we doing? Just a few brief thoughts. We're dealing with death when we talk about funerals, and that's quite a big thing. All of us have to face up to our own mortality, that sooner or later one day we will die. And before that happens, we encounter death in different forms, bereavement and so on. So just to sort of flag that up, that one wit once said grief is a funny thing. It's not always linear, not always predictable. Sometimes your bereavement, your grief just ambushes you, jumps out at unexpected moments and goes boo and makes you jump. And so it may be in the course of this that you suddenly find yourself feeling something which you weren't expecting, and that just can happen. So if that happens, that's fine. And if you want to slip out at some point and just sit in the resource centre out the back there, that's also fine. If you do that, one of us who are sort of leading might just come and say, "Are you okay? Are you happy on your own? Would you like someone to talk to, just to see how you are?" But just to sort of flag that stuff up, because nobody quite knows how how this may play out in terms of our own personal experience and when that comes up. I think we'll go into some of those issues a bit more in the middle of this morning with the bit that Sarah's going to lead us in terms of our own experience of death and bereavement, because that is a very important thing in all of this. What are we trying to achieve? Yes, it was on the, hopefully you've all received the sort of outline of the course that I emailed you. So the details are kind of there. But it's developing skills and confidence understanding in this ministry, with a view to all of you, hopefully in time taking funerals. That's not guaranteed. In the course of the training, you might feel, no, this is not for me. And at the end of it, your incumbent, or whoever is kind of supporting and supervising you, they need to be involved in working out, how will this play out, and is this the right ministry? So there's a kind of discernment aspect in this. But the hope is that by the end of this, you will be able in confidence to take funerals. Bishop Pete encouraged us to launch this, but he's also concerned that we have a solid bit of initial training, which is what this course is, before people then go into this ministry, because he's aware how important this ministry is, and he gets a certain amount of correspondence when this ministry goes badly, which of course is usually about the clergy, but that's how it is. So he's really concerned to support this, but he's also concerned that we have a good solid grounding to get it launched. A key person in that is the person supporting you. We'll come back to that in a minute. But you've hopefully seen the dates and times, this hybrid approach. So we've got 3 Saturday mornings here, and then I think it's 5 evenings online on Zoom. The eagle-eyed may have noticed that there are 2 different times given for the evening sessions. On the front.
The one that Susanna sent out yesterday still said the 5th of November instead of the 4th.
Oh, right. Did you send something out yesterday? Right. I can get that. Yeah. No, it's the 4th. We moved from the 5th to the 4th of November because one or two of us felt that there might be a lot of noise going on the 5th of November in our neighbourhoods. Some of us say noisier neighbourhoods than others, but it's definitely Tuesday the 4th is our next gathering. And on what I sent you, the front of it says we start at 7:15. But then I think later on it says we start at 7.
Yep.
So that's the deliberate mistake. And I'll just get a straw poll from you as to which you prefer before we finish.
Suggested 7:15 because that made it easier for me to get there on that Tuesday, and then the rest were better, but they could all start at 7:15.
Yes. Okay.
That was probably where they choose.
Yes, 7:15 generally is, it's less of a rush over evening meal. But obviously it's a slightly later finish. We're trying to do a 2-hour session with a break in the middle. I mean, I think consistency probably helps for all of us, otherwise it's harder to remember. But is sort of 7:15 to 9:15 workable for people generally?
Slightly earlier because my husband's well, 9-year-old needs bedtime stuff.
Yes, okay.
My husband ends up away. It'd be really late night getting my little one. It takes him a good hour to get him to sleep, so I can't put him to bed. Like, and go, I'll be here. I need to be with him the whole time.
Right.
So the later it goes, the later like potential bedtime is that might.
Might be an
Also, my brain switches off at that.
Well, there is that question. Yeah, I mean, most of it needs to be finding out.
Well, 2 o'clock, it's probably the afternoon.
Mark, are you involved in the 4th of November one? I can't remember. Well, let's say the 4th of November we'll do 7:15 because that was what Mark was flagging that he needs to be able to get there. So for the next one, 7:15, but then we'll perhaps review for the new year and see how that plays out. Is that okay? Yeah. And yeah, dates and times, hybrid approach, that's the main thing. Zoom, I think mostly familiar with because the pandemic taught us all about Zoom. So hopefully that will work all right. Yes, one of the key components, there's 2 key components really. There's these sessions, both in Church House and online. And then the other one is the practical experience. So all of you will have a supervisor. Most of you, it's your incumbent, your vicar, whoever that may be, or if you're in a vacancy, that's more complicated. But that's a key person in terms of enabling you to get experience in this ministry. You may need to sort of just encourage them, nudge them, because this is a new thing for them as well as for you. And they need to enable you to, first of all, experience a funeral just observing. And it should be one where you're not actually one of the mourners, so it's not somebody is important to you or you were close to, but one where you can have a bit more emotional distance and just observe what's going on. And then some more experience after that, hopefully they'll take you on a funeral visit beforehand to meet the family, and hopefully get you a bit more involved in leading parts of the service. That may vary in terms of what's feasible, what's appropriate for different funerals. So your supervisor incumbent needs to work that out. They're a key person for enabling you to get experience and then reflecting with you on that experience. What was it like in that funeral? What happened? How did you feel about it? How did people respond to it? Just that thing of reflecting and learning. And with that, we ask you just to keep a journal, to jot down your own reflections. A journal is a record of what you did. So we went to this funeral, but also more importantly, what you made of it, how it impacted you, what you noticed, what you found strange or puzzling. So keeping some kind of reflective journal, which you can then just accumulate over the course and let us see at the end. So we can get a sense of what your experience has been and what your ability to reflect has been, because reflecting on experience is a really important aspect of any kind of ministry, and certainly of this one. So do keep in touch with your supervisor, and do just gently give them a nudge saying, I'm looking forward to whatever it is to being involved in this, because they've got to add this to their already busy repertoire of ministries and things, and they'll be very glad to do that. But sometimes they'll just need a bit of a reminder, I suspect. And reflective journal, there we are. We've mentioned that. And then last but not least is pilot. You are the guinea pigs. This is an experimental course, so we haven't thrown it open to the whole diocese and advertised it very widely. What we've done is we've had a few people who we've approached, or else they've approached us about this, few incumbents, few clergy. And so in that rather ad hoc way, we've gathered a group. And then hopefully if this goes well and we learn from this experience, then we'll roll it out and advertise it more widely. But inevitably, you are the pioneers. That's a better word than guinea pigs, isn't it? You are the pioneers forging a new path. So just cope with us if it's a little bit experimental, because it is. We haven't done this before, and we're looking forward to it.
You know what they say about pioneers? they're the ones found lying face down in the dust with arrows in their back.
Well, hopefully not. And one thing I forgot to mention, should have done at the start, is we're recording the session. So, for example, Keith is missing today. Hopefully, he can get to see this. So we won't record around the tables because we can't do that, and that doesn't work. But the sort of presentation bits, like I'm doing now, we'll record, and that's only for those who've missed a session. It's not for the wider world, and it's also for us to look back afterwards and reflect on how's it gone, what can we improve, that kind of thing. So 3 sessions this morning, having done the intro stuff. Michael's going to give us a broad brush picture on funerals in the UK. And then Sarah's going to help us think about our own experiences in terms of bereavement and death and how that affects us. And then Mark's going to help us with some of the theology behind all this in the final session, in terms of life and death and eternal life, and what our faith understanding underpinning all this is. So I'm very grateful to have all 3 of them here. We won't have them all here on every session because that's just too much demand on people's time, but we wanted to get everyone together for the first session, but we haven't quite managed it with Eleanor not being able to join us. Before I hand over to Michael, any questions on these bits and pieces? Does that make sense? More or less what you were expecting?
Do we hand our journals in for a certain time slot where we hand?
Yeah, I think it's towards the end, isn't it? About May time, is it? I can't remember. Yes. So I mean, the ideal is if you can keep it in a digital form, then you can email it. But if that doesn't work for you and you want a written form, that's fine. But one way or the other, as part of the final assessment process, is it's really for the incumbents and maybe myself and someone else just to have a look at and see how you've got on and so on. So if you can make that available in May time, is that all right?
I had a question about replacement, because I already said pretty much the same person that does all of our funerals. Like for all 4 of the churches. So I've seen lots and lots and lots of funerals. I've seen other people come in when she isn't available. But obviously one of the things it says in the instructions on replacement is to see different people do them. So is that something where this group can work together to maybe, from the point of view of observing, actually we can observe in each other's churches, and maybe that's because they're not necessarily going to come up. It's not like something that you go like, oh yes, we know there'll be a funeral on the 12th of February now, because obviously they're reactive. So is that something that we can maybe have some kind of group chatness thing going on around?
So you mean so experience not just one person, not just observing one person?
Yeah, and observing it not in your home church, I think, is really important, because obviously your church will have a way that they do funerals, and you can learn more from other people. So if you just learn in your own church, we're not bringing as much new and varied ideas.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I mean, I think initially at this stage, it's a matter of getting alongside your supervising incumbent, whoever it is, and doing it with them, because that's the key thing. But then that wider thing of getting more experience of how other people lead funerals, I think could be really valuable, because they aren't all the same, in the same way that Sunday services aren't all the same.
And in the same way, some of the smaller parishes might do that many funerals. So if you're not doing that many funerals, it's quite hard. Potentially, you're not going to see one for a while, then that might also come in.
Yes, let me have a think about that, because that may take a bit of organising, liaising, but equally, if you informally see opportunities to go and observe another funeral that someone you know, then I'd say do take that, because that's the other route to get this wider experience. So yeah, thank you for flagging that. I'll have a think about that, just how we...
Does the diocese have a SharePoint?
Yeah.
If you could create a folder and access to the group, there could be a spreadsheet where people just put funerals that they're all aware of. And potentially,
I mean, because obviously I'm verging at funerals, so I did one this week. And I'd happily just go in and jot that in a SharePoint, and then if somebody's like, "Oh, I've not got anything on this week," like, "Oh, I could go to that one," and you can just come and observe it. That might open up opportunities to people in churches who don't happen.
Yeah, thank you. I'll have a think about that, as to how best to try and make that work. But that's a good question to raise. So thank you. Okay, I think we'll move on. Can I hand over to Michael at this point, and I'll I'll give way, maybe stop screen sharing.
Can I bring this lectern?
Yes, if you want to use that, that's absolutely. I'll come out of the way here and just play with camera stuff. Visible. Where do you want to stand?
I'll just keep it up there so I'm not blocking anybody's view. I only use a lectern because it makes me feel authoritarian. I like that.
Do you mean authoritarian or authoritative?
I'll tell you as we go through. Oh, that's me. Hello. Right. Can't look at that. I'd be ashamed if I didn't know. So what I'm going to do is talk through funerals in the UK, certain trends that we're seeing, certain things that are happening, and go through where sort of ideas of where they may have come from. Now, in order to do that, and up until COVID, when I'd speak to people about funerals, I used to say that in order to know where we are now, today, got to look back to see where we've come from. But since COVID, that's kind of thrown my patter out the window a bit, but I think there's still some truth in it, so bear with me. This is going to be a lot of me giving you a potted history of funerals throughout time as well. So what I would say, if there's anything on your mind, if you think of something, feel free just to interrupt me. Don't sit there and be ever so polite and think I'll ask at the end, because just don't. I've been married for 13 years. I'm well used to being interrupted and corrected. So feel free to shout up if there's anything that you've got on your mind. So, in order to think about funerals today, if we think back to the first known and understood, not so much funeral, but burial practices. And we can go back as far as pagan days, well before the time of Christ in this country. We can see things like burial mounds. We can see evidence of people leaving things with their deceased loved ones for an afterlife. There's some sense that that deceased person is indeed on a journey of some kind. There's quite a lot of evidence for that. And even in the Bronze Age, there is even evidence of cremations taking place. So we're not particularly just thinking about burials. But even if we go that far back, we are still noticing that at the point of death, something happens. There's never in history, I'll come to something shortly, but there's never in history been a time around death where nothing happened. We have always marked death, the place where somebody died, the place where somebody had been buried throughout history, even back in pagan times and in the Bronze Age. And it wasn't until sort of the Roman age that we started to get a much more ceremonial feel to funerals themselves. We start to get processions to the burial site with family mourners following behind. Sometimes they had, you may have seen Roman people had masks made of their deceased loved ones. I can't imagine they were that lifelike, but they would wear a mask of their deceased loved one as they followed to a burial site. And it's also in the Roman era that we start to see hired mourners, professional people to follow the cortege to the site of burial, wailing and crying and making this a real ceremonial feel. And that carried on quite a bit up until about the Middle Ages. So we're moving through history at quite a rate of knots. And of course, in the Middle Ages, we've got Christianity in this country. We're a Catholic country at that time. And there's much more of a sense of ceremony building, because now, for those that could sort of afford it, we've got things like Requiem Mass, a specific service for the dead, to pray for their souls and to assist their souls into the heavenly realm. And it's also an age where we've got much more wealth, so more of these kind of services are taking place. And it's the time as well in the Middle Ages where we started to see burial grounds moving out of the town or out of the village. And the biggest driver of that was the plagues. So we start to see cemeteries in the middle of nowhere. You think, that's a funny place, there's nothing around here for a cemetery. That was why. If people had died of plague, you want them out the way as far as you possibly can take them. And the Middle Ages also, following on from the Roman period, was where we started to adopt black as a mourning colour. Strangely, the Catholics adopt purple more for mourning, but in the times we're talking about, it was black was the official colour of mourning. And that went right through the Tudor period, gained some traction until we arrive at the Victorian era. And I think the Victorian era is probably the era in which we can really say our funerals haven't moved much from, because we've got, now in Victorian times, we're talking about horse-drawn hearses. So a hearse in the Victorian times, the first time an actual vehicle is used to convey the deceased person to the church and then onto a cemetery. Before then, we'd be using things like barrows. And some churches, Wadworth has certainly got one in the Lichgate, a barrow to transport the coffin for its burial. It's in the Victorian era that funeral dress for funeral directors was particularly prevalent. Top hat, mourning suit, tails, again, black. People would wear their very best black clothes. That black suit that's been in the cupboard for 20 years, got mothballs in the pocket and it stinks. They put that on as their official mourning dress. Closed curtains. Famously, Queen Victoria mourned for 40 years after Prince Albert died. 40 years she wore nothing more than black, had a miserable face, and never really grieved the loss of her husband. So that real sort of sense of mourning, in a sense, holding a death as a very important, significant part of life, came to its fruition in the Victorian eras. And nowadays we follow on from that. I wear a top hat at work. I wear tails. We walk in a funeral procession. Those things are still with us in the main from the Victorian era. And it was a Victorian era as well, and some of you may remember this from your families, where...
From the Victorian era.
Hang on. Then I'll rephrase that, rewind. There was a tradition from the Victorian era that lasted, and still does last to some people, where the actual deceased person was taken home and the coffin was in the front parlour. It still happens, believe it or not, in the best room reserved for the vicar and the dead. That's all it was reserved for, but the best room, the front of the house. And people would go to the house to pay their respects. Incidentally, we say after a funeral, we're going to the wake. Well, that was never the wake. The idea of the wake was you woke up with the deceased on the morning of the funeral in the front parlour. What you're actually having afterwards is a reception. But that would happen. People would come and pay their respects, see the deceased person in the front room. And of course, funerals would take place very, very quickly as well in Victorian era. You'd be talking a matter of days between the death occurring and the funeral taking place. Victorians were also very big on embalming as well, but that's something completely different. And that particularly was the way things were done up until, I think, about 25 years ago, maybe 30, depending on where you were. And all of a sudden, we started to see, about 30 years ago, a change in attitudes. Funerals had been governed by sort of societal changes, what the hierarchy in society were doing. Oh, well, that seems right, we'll do that. But it's only in recent times that we're starting to see the funeral as something not to mourn and weep and cry over. Yeah, of course it's sad, I'm not taking that away from it. But all of a sudden, we're hearing people saying, we want to celebrate their life. That hadn't happened, because that's not what a funeral was, by the way. afterwards, after the funeral ceremony, the funeral rites had taken place and been concluded, you could then go back to the family home or wherever you were going, have a drink and remember those stories, those, you know, that fondness that you had for that person, but not at the funeral. That wasn't what it was for. The funeral was to mourn and to grieve the loss of somebody. So all of a sudden, coincidentally, with the rise of funeral celebrants, you know what I mean when I say funeral celebrants, by the way, the rise of funeral celebrants, a different way of doing funerals, perhaps a less religious way of doing funerals. People were starting to say, instead of in loving memory, celebration of the life of. I remember that because it was quite distinctive at the time, the mood, the change, that all of a sudden we weren't putting on black and crying and weeping and looking sad and shaking each other's hand. We were sort of smiling a bit more. It was an odd sort of time, but that came in. The rise of funeral celebrants, as I've just mentioned, has been on the rise for quite some time and continues to. And the celebrant would say, we come at things from a non-religious point of view. Well, that's not true. That just isn't true. What the celebrant does, the funeral celebrant, and I'm making a distinction between religious leader and funeral celebrant, is say, what do you want me to do? And I'll do it. I'm going to represent you on the day of this funeral. What do you want me to say? What don't you want me to say? Who do you want me to mention? Who don't want you want me to mention? And build up a service, if we can say service, but a time together based on what the family want. Now, lots of people call these kind of services non-religious services. Very rarely are they non-religious services. Very often in these services, you would have somebody say, we don't want any religion, but Granny in the corner, that's very stereotypical, but you know, somebody in the corner might say, we've got to say Lord's Prayer. Oh, okay, so we're going to do that. Oh, and incidentally, we're going to come into the crematorium with Harry Seacombe singing The Lord's My Shepherd. Interesting. And then at some point, there'll be some reference to an afterlife in that conversation. So don't think that one of the things I would say, take away from this, what I'm saying, don't necessarily assume that celebrant means non-religious, because it doesn't. Okay. But in this period of about 30 years on or so, we've also moved away from black. We are now experiencing a lot of people saying, could you tell people to wear an item of clothing with some colour on it to reflect the colourful nature of the person that's passed away? Could they wear red because he was a Liverpool fan? Or could people even wear Liverpool shirts, not even a shirt and tie? These kind of things have come in and become more prevalent. Now, in terms of some numbers, out of 526,000 funerals in the UK that were conducted last year, and these are statistics from the National Association of Funeral Directors, by the way, out of 526,000 funerals, roughly about 33% of them were religious funerals conducted by the Church of England. Now, that could vary a little bit on actually what people say, because they may say vicar, and it could have been a Catholic priest, or it could have been a Methodist minister. But if we think about a third of them are classed as a religious service, that's quite a lot of funerals. 10 in Thurnscoe, apparently. Not that many in the grand scheme of things. A third of them. But, and as I say, the interesting thing about that is that might be a third of those funerals carried out what we would call a religious service, but there are all those other services with funeral celebrants that have got aspects or elements or parts of them where there are some religion included. So don't let that statistic make you feel downcast.
Would you differentiate between religious and spiritual
That is a good question, because lots of people will say, I'm not religious, I am spiritual.
Yeah.
And in truth, I'm not 100% sure what that would mean. And I'm not 100% sure that a lot of the people that would say that, because if I say the word spiritual, you might think of meditation with joss sticks and candles. Again, I'm generalizing. You might think of that idea of spirituality. You might think of a spirituality that brings you, like a Franciscan idea, in tune with nature, something like that. So there are a lot of people that would say they were spiritual, but not religious. And I think a lot of those people that say they are spiritual are actually searching for something. Yeah. And I just think I know what they're searching for. And I think we do as well, or we believe we do. But it's an interesting question. Lots of people, and if you lead funeral services, you will visit people and they will come out with statements like this. One of my favourite visits, I went to arrange a funeral, and there was a chap, I think he was the son of the gentleman who passed away, and he said, I'll just tell you now, before you start, I don't want none of that religious rubbish. At least I know where I stand. I'm a funeral director. They wouldn't say it to me dressed like this. They'd say it to me as a funeral director. To the vicar, they'd say, oh, come in, vicar, nice to see you, have a cup of tea. Yeah. Not when you go as a funeral director. We don't want none of that religious rubbish. They were his words. And you arrange a funeral and you go through a certain order of, well, I do, as to how I attack things. So I now know we're not having a religious service. That's what he said. I'm going to unpick this a bit. So start to talk about music. I said, have you any thoughts about music? Did your dad say anything about the music he liked? And he went, he'd be looking down and laughing on us now. Hold on. Where's this religious rubbish now? Where's he looking down from? The rooftop? What? There's nothing there, remember? And I wouldn't say it as coarsely as that, but you've got to remember that there's many people on journeys, especially at a time of grief, that need to be guided through, and often what they actually believe in. And that's where we come in, because we've got that opportunity, that great privilege, that wonderful God-given opportunity to sit with the bereaved, to help them in their own journey of grief, of hurt, of loss, and of faith as well. Anyway, back to funerals. Yeah, so we're in a situation now where we've got much less black. Things are changing. We've got much more of a celebratory feel to things. We've got much more of a we want to gather and be happy rather than we should gather to be sad kind of a feel to things. That's where we were. And the funeral celebrants were on the rise, or still are on the rise. And there are so many of them now. I don't know if you've noticed that. There's so many funeral celebrants. As funeral directors, we get letters nearly every week from somebody introducing themselves, sending biscuits and cakes and all the rest of it, and saying, I'm a new funeral celebrant and this is why you've got to use me. And there is even professional bodies for funeral celebrants now. So this is a thing. This really is a thing. It's not a fad and it's not going away. There's the Association of Independent Funeral Celebrants. There is the Funeral Celebrancy Council. There is the Fellowship of Professional Funeral Celebrants. I don't know what a lot of those do, except for I know that the Association of Independent Celebrants hold an awards ceremony every year. A bit like if you think back to Father Ted, those of you who watch Father Ted, the Golden Cleric Award, yeah, sparkly dresses, glitter ball, that's kind of what it's like. And they take feedback from families. How was your funeral celebrant? What did they do? And somehow rank them. You know, I'm always wary of awards dinners that you have to pay to go to. I think there's a reason for it. But yeah, they do that. And then 2020 came, or 2019, COVID came, and bang, everything stopped. And we went from funerals, celebrations, whatever we had, to nothing, basically. We went to 20 minutes at a crematorium. Churches were closed in that first way. We could have 8 people at Doncaster in the crematorium. I know certain ones varied. Equally distanced at 3 foot or whatever it was apart from each other. Reduced time, so we had 20 minutes wearing masks. You couldn't leave from the family home. You couldn't sit in a limousine with other people because you couldn't unless you were a bubble, but then you couldn't do it anyway because the driver wasn't part of your bubble, so limousines never turned a wheel in all that time. Funeral services went to being committal services, the very last part of the funeral service, the farewell and nothing else. No grand celebration, no laughing, no smiling, no anything, just a final committal. And COVID robbed this world and so many people of the opportunity to grieve properly and say farewell to their loved ones properly. And to see that 3 times a day, 5 days a week, I can assure you, was absolutely 100% heartbreaking. I get quite angry when we hear about certain people who may have broken the rules, but I'm not going political at this stage. But that's what we had. We had nothing. We had the very basic of things. And out of that, that time, unexpectedly, from my point of view, because I thought people would want to have big celebrations, big parties, a bit like the war was over, let's rejoice in the streets. Of course, it didn't happen like that because it was a gradual thing. But out of that came the trend in direct cremation, which I'm sure you've all at least heard or come across. And interestingly now, 20% of all funerals or all deaths result in a direct cremation. 20% of all deaths have nothing. So I started at the very beginning by saying we've always marked death in some way. In 20% of cases nowadays, we're not even marking it at all. It's a non-event. It doesn't happen. It's quite staggering, really, when you think about it. And when you think about the impact that it has, not to the deceased so much, depending on your beliefs, but the family, friends, the loved ones, who don't get that opportunity to say goodbye, but don't get the opportunity to do anything.
I'm likely thinking with direct cremations. I seem to remember Ian Smith when he was here telling me about a lady in the parish whose husband signed up for a direct cremation, and it ended up being in Portsmouth at 8 o'clock in the morning or something.
Yes.
Yeah. She was devastated.
The company that rose, a national company. So when you hear things on the TV, on the radio, you see in the papers, release your loved ones from the burden of a funeral. The biggest company is a company called Pure Cremation.
Yeah.
And they were a husband and wife team. I forget where they were, somewhere in the Midlands. I might have been sat, it doesn't matter. But they were a husband and wife team that ran this company. It was called Pure Cremation. It was just basically for people that didn't want anything at all. Before COVID, Pure Cremation, or this idea of nothing, was either reserved for people who had no family or friends whatsoever and were sort of looked after by the local health authority, the local social services, should I say, or for people who've done some pretty bad, wicked things and nobody wanted to know that they died or whatever. So it never really happened. The odd one, maybe one a year. COVID came and Pure Cremation went boom, off the scale. They went from an outfit doing about 100 services a year to floating on the London Stock Exchange. It went that big and still is. I think the parent company that owns them is worth £700 billion at the moment. But they will say, for their fee, they will collect your loved one from wherever they die, take them for a cremation and return the ashes to you. And that's exactly what they do, what they say on the tin. But that could be in Portsmouth, it could be in Andover, it could be in Carlisle, it could be anywhere in the UK, and it could take any length of time as well.
Can I just mention something there about that as well? You may well have come across this yourself, Michael, but for me personally, as a priest, I've had to then come in and help families where they just couldn't cope with that and then wanted some sort of service, memorial service, whatever you want to call it, because they felt that they just didn't have I mean, to not say goodbye. And I think the problem with the pure cremations is that the secular world or the adverts that are advertising these make it sound like it's going to be so lovely and so helpful, but it's really not helping people to grieve, in my opinion, because then they're coming to me saying, I don't know what to do. This is, I never even saw the body. It was that they just went, and I don't even know where they were cremated. And this was one of the things where I talked to the diocese about. We need to do something about it, because people aren't grieving in a way that feels natural to them.
In that respect, with not seeing the body, it's actually worse than the way we handle our pets. Because I'm a cat man, and over the years, my cats have passed away. I've been the one who's taken them to be cremated, and I then get the ashes back a few days later. But I've been with my companion for as long as feasible, right up to the moment where the vet will take him or her off my hands. And I have problems with the sort of pure cremation thing. It goes back to all these jokes about having Granny and a biscuit tin on the shelf. And it's
We'll pick some of the stuff around ritual and what ritual might be doing. You might actually want to have a funeral, not a pure. Sort of later in the course. There's two thoughts that it'd be interesting. This is a question from me because I'm fascinating. So you talked about the length of services and COVID reducing it. My memory, when I started the Ritual Kings in 2003, 2004, that most of the slots in the crematorium were 20 minutes.
They were, yeah.
So it's interesting how that's changed. I guess that's some of perhaps we want more of a celebration.
Yeah.
So we need more.
That's right. In fact, some crematoriums even now are still only offering 20 minutes for the service if it takes place in the crematorium. That's largely changing. Most crematoriums are working to an hour slot now because there's more being built. But as we've gone through, as time's gone on, there's been the need for more things to be said, more things to be put into the funeral service, more family members wanting to be part of the service. That's another thing that's come as a relatively recent thing. So times have been extended in Doncaster from 20 minutes, then to half an hour, then to 40 minutes, and then to almost an hour's allocation. So that's come on quite a bit in time. Of course, then once you establish that precedent of we get this long at the crematorium, so Uncle Joe Cobley and all wants to speak, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. We're going to have these 3 pieces of absolutely dreadful music and all the rest of it. When you've established that precedent, to go back to 20 minutes, it feels like, because people have forgotten those days, where we only did the very basic things. So it's almost like resetting a precedent in that respect.
Yeah, you just said there about dreadful music, but if it's the family's choice, is it our opinion to be able to say it's dreadful?
Oh, I always do.
Yeah.
I'm joking. No. And absolutely that, because another thing that's changed, I don't want to lose sight of Sarah's point, but you're right. One thing that has changed is the way in which we think about music for a funeral service. Now, if I sit with people of advancing years, I'm talking people in the maybe 80s, 90s, I don't know, they might be inclined to suggest that certain music, Burn Baby Burn, Bat Out of Hell, whatever.
Always look on the bright
side of life. They might be inclined to say that's not respectful for a funeral. They might be expecting some sort of dowry baroque sort of sound or organ sound. Whereas younger people might say, well, we can do whatever we like. So we'll have Match of the Day. We'll listen to Morecambe and Wise, Bring Me Sunshine, or whatever's in the charts at the time. So that has changed as well.
I did it my way.
I did it my way.
Time to say goodbye.
Time to say goodbye. I love that. People say, oh, those words,
I know,
lovely,
that's
time to
so
say
lovely,
goodbye.
time.
How do you know? The only words in English are time to say goodbye. The rest of it, I don't know what they're saying. I don't speak Italian. But yes, you're right. I would always say to the family, if you think it's right for that person, if that's what they liked, that is what we're going to have. Never mind my personal taste. I've often said if the sound system at the crematorium breaks, I can pretty much sing any Frank Sinatra song. Sing any hymn. I could. Anyway, I just want to finish on this point because
Again,
yeah.
we'll pick some of that up as we go through the course of where our boundaries might be. And you were saying your different roles as funeral director and as a minister, and where you might say that. And I can remember Michael Perrin, who was sort of a liturgist, saying that he never would have I did it my way because he says regrets I've had a few, but then she used to mention to say that's not theological for me. We all have our different boundaries in that, and that would be one of the invitations. And that's the type of thing when you're going to the funeral and observing or thinking, well, am I comfortable with that? Or how did that music make me feel? It's really interesting to reflect on.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a good point. And there is, and I joke about things like this, that there was an old priest in Doncaster, he's still taking funerals, really quite good still. But he told me that we were coming, I've never heard the music we come out to, it's called Disco Inferno, and I'm thinking, you've not heard this. You've not heard this. And he went every shade of crimson in 2 seconds that you could possibly go, because he didn't know what was coming. But yeah, absolutely, yeah. To know what we're doing.
It's not necessarily the words that people are connecting with, it's memories of that.
Yeah. It's true.
It's also worth saying I've taken lots of baby funerals, and I always listen to what music people have asked through, because I want to know what it's feel.
Yeah.
Have a sense of what emotion this might be doing to me when I get relaxed. So if you're coming out, you know it's going to stay. I'm a fire starter.
Yeah.
You need to know so that you can keep a straight face.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody's ever asked that so far.
Oh, no, I did it.
Yeah. Oh, it's on the list. Yeah. I just want to finish with, I'm just going to pick up on Sarah's point about, I think we talk about direct cremation and as Mark said, as we go through issues around these things. But where I'm going to land this is just to say that because of this 20% rise in direct cremation, and because we are no longer under any restriction, COVID-wise or things like that, these things are happening, direct cremation are happening, and then people are thinking afterwards, what do we do? It doesn't feel right. I haven't said goodbye. And the latest rise, I'm talking about trends and how things come in and go out, the latest rise in things that I'm hearing are either people contacting mostly clergy, but celebrants as well, to say either we want to inter the ashes, but we want to make something of this because we didn't have a funeral, or we want to have some form of Thanksgiving service, or we want something so that we can mark the passing of our loved one. And that's something that you're not on your own. It's many people are asking us as funeral directors, is there anything we can do? They might not know what they want, but they're thinking we've not done something. Not that we've not done something quite right. We might have followed Dad's wishes, but we need something. And that has always been the key question of many of us will have to ask ourselves, and I know we're going to cover this as well, is who is that funeral for? It's not 100% for the deceased, it's for us as well. And this rise in people seeking something might tie back into the spirituality idea. It might tie into people thinking, well, this just isn't good enough. Who knows? But there is a big rise in people asking for something beyond a direct cremation.
The closest I've seen to that historically, for me personally, was back in '89 when a friend of mine was killed in an accident. He was cremated and interred up in Durham.
Mm.
But then about 6 weeks later,
Mm.
friends of hers down here organised a service, like a memorial service in the local church, because there was two groups of distinct groups, people of family, Durham family and Sheffield, friends and family sort of thing.
Yeah.
So and I suppose we see the memorial services put together for well-known people as well after the funeral.
Absolutely.
So there is kind of some precedence there to toy with.
Indeed. And when cremation first had it, the first crematorium was built in 1885, they didn't have chapels. It was just a direct cremation. That's the first direct cremation. But very soon they built chapels at crematoriums to allow people to mourn.
I'm going to put the coffee on, which gives us 3 or 4 minutes for more questions with Mike.
Right.
All right. So I'm sure there's lots more that's provoked that you want to ask about.
I think the adverts for the pure cremation just don't outline everything. It makes it sound good.
I definitely think that, definitely, Keith, yeah. Because what do they say? Save your loved ones the hassle. Well, if we could, wouldn't we save our loved ones any kind of hassle whatsoever? Would we not want to relieve our loved ones of the pressure? The funeral director's response to that is not to have a direct cremation, is to make a funeral plan.
Yeah.
That is another way of relieving any worry and pressure. I'm just being careful that I'm not trying to sell something here, but actually, how do we relieve the strains and the pressures of a funeral on our loved ones? Do it for them. Have it ready.
The cost as well.
And the cost as well.
I give the money to my children, she might have said before she died. And
yeah.
That's another complicated thing there.
It is. And funerals don't have to be that expensive if we just think about them. One thing we don't do nowadays is think about death. We don't like to think about death. It's going to happen to death and taxes, all that kind of thing.
My bit,
Yeah. Well, you nicked mine. We don't necessarily. Sorry, when Sarah was talking to me earlier, I was reading her notes at the same time. We don't. We don't talk about it in the same way that we would have spoke about it in Victorian times and later on, and the way that they sort of make funeral plans on the continent as well. We don't talk about these things, so it becomes uncomfortable because it becomes unnatural because it's not what we do.
Some people do their own before they die, don't they? Have all set up.
Absolutely, and I tell you now, I'm not talking about purchasing a funeral plan from a funeral director. I'm not saying that they are the best thing to do, because I'm actually not. They are good, but I'm not saying that. If you just took a piece of A4 and spent a bit of time writing what you want on that to happen, you would not believe the relief I see on the families when I come in. Rather than saying, so what kind of music did your mum like? Oh, well, it was that organ stuff, wasn't it? Oh, that's easy then. Or when they say, well, she said she wanted to sing this hymn, she wanted that, she wanted this, wanted that. Job, that's what she wanted, that's what we're going to do. The relief on people's faces, that is what I would say. I wish I could show the world that relief on the face of people, because that is genuinely the release the burden on your loved ones that pure cremation put forward.
But I also, when my mum died, she'd had a plan.
Mm.
But I felt it really not part of my grieving because there was nothing for me to do for my mum.
Mm.
You know, she'd done it all, and I felt I couldn't help her, couldn't give to her. You know,
it's an interesting way of looking at it. But what you've done is you've enacted her last wishes.
I understand that. But you go and say, oh, well, we thought.
There's something about being busy after somebody died.
And you are.
It's part of that grieving process that takes your mind off of the death element, I suppose, into doing something practical for that person. That's probably the last practical thing that you can do, other than the houses that need to be emptied. I mean, paperwork-wise, it's crazy, isn't it, when somebody dies?
I suppose we could look at it and say, actually, you choosing something from yourself for her, we often see that in things like floral tributes. You know, I'm going to buy my mum, my dad these flowers. It's an act in which we can physically do something, and that's what many times we're seeking to do, is actually do something for them. We want to do everything for them because that in its own way is honouring their life and everything that they've meant to each of us as well. Yeah.
So my grandmother still fun. She was quite ill, and she she knew she was dying. She'd started to write her own eulogy.
Right.
She didn't quite finish it, but she'd put all like the entirety of it was a memorial service, but that was location because the friend was like an hour and a half away.
Yes. Yeah.
So she was cremated, and then we went straight from the cremation to the memorial service. And so that was like a big church service with all of her favourite hymns and everything that she planned. But she hadn't planned anything for the prem.
Right.
And one of my cousins was like, she's not put the 23rd Psalm in. We need to read that. So she read that. So it's almost like having that plan is brilliant if there's a bit of wiggle room in it, just so you can just so not having it so structured that it's.
But she wanted to make sure nobody said the wrong thing about her.
Oh yeah, I mean she was that woman. Yeah. No.
We get that where we want to do everything for our loved ones. We want to do it the way they did it, but it goes back to that, who's the funeral for? We're grieving as well as they've died. And that little input. And just to say, actually, that's a really good point, which I haven't mentioned actually, but you can suggest this style of doing a funeral to go to the crematorium first, have the committal prayers, have the final prayers of the service, and then return to church for a service of thanksgiving. You can do that. And for many people, not for everybody, it won't work for everybody, but for many people, the physical the coffin not physically being present in church can lead to them feeling much more relaxed in some cases, much more that we are giving thanks for a life. It doesn't work for everybody, but if you've got an inkling that actually this might be an idea, plus the fact that you've not got a grumpy funeral director saying you've got 25 minutes and get on with it.
That's okay, but quite often we're given. As a vicar, the funeral director will call me, and I will get the time for the church and the time for the friend. We don't get a say in what.
Well, good.
So what you're saying to me is, I can say to them, "No, I want to do it the other way around."
You could do.
I spoke to somebody who says that I can change that.
I would want you to do that if that was the case. If I didn't, as a funeral director, pick up on this notion, but when you visited, we could do this the other way around. It's not massively difficult. All we do is put the service of Thanksgiving back to the church after the committal, the crema time that might be booked. You can do this, and
it's less work for the funeral director, isn't it?
It's a lot less work for the funeral director because we don't have to sit for an hour reminiscing of how lovely this person was.
Oh no,
no, certainly not. But it's always an option. Don't be restrained by tradition, is what I'm saying to you. Really.
What we found a lot of pushback on it.
Right.
My dad was very against it. And this was all planned, because she lived in Pickering, and it was the East Yorkshire prem.
Yeah.
So it was a long way, and we did get stuck in traffic, and it did take ages. And the actual memorial service started like 20 minutes late in a packed church because she was she'd been very involved in the church and in the community. So it was like you couldn't fit everybody in the crem. Yeah. But it meant you had just the family in the crem, so you had that like close family only, and they'd already done a little bit of mourning.
Yeah, I can
so
see they're all hovering.
Yeah, sorry.
But two points around what if. So I think there's something, and again, we'll pick this up next point around grief, and everyone grieves differently. So for some people, having a list absolutely wonderful because they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
For other people, that it's just remembering that everyone is going to grieve differently with that. In terms of tradition, I think it's worth thinking about what are our traditions and what do we expect, and they differ as well. So actually, on the continent, that's far more of a usual thing to have the committal first and then everything. So we have the traditions that we think of, but they again that might be different from the people that we're then supporting. Like, well, every funeral I've been to has been like that.
Yeah, the idea that a funeral is wrong if it's not done traditionally, yeah.
So I'm going to talk about how we feel about aging, illness, and death. And so I just wanted to start off with a little story, really. When I was a little girl, I would have probably been about 8 years old. My family didn't go to church. We weren't churchgoers, so there was no faith aspect involved in my youth. Anyway, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, we had wonderful times with my grandparents, and I remember it so well. And we were very close to my grandma. And then one day she was suddenly disappeared out of my life. It was my dad's mum. And I remember my dad still is a very quiet man and doesn't show a lot of emotion. And occasionally I'd catch him crying, but my mum ushering me off. And suddenly I just couldn't understand what was going off and where my grandma was. Nobody would explain anything to me, even though I kept asking. I then worked out for myself over time that my grandma had died, but no explanation was given to me whatsoever. And then years later, I was a lot older. My granddad died, so my grandma and so my granddad, whose wife had died, my grandma, and then my mum and dad said, well, you might want to come and say goodbye to him. So I went along to the morgue with them, having this would be the first experience ever for me of anybody dying. And my granddad was laid in the morgue, and I went, my mum says, do you want to kiss him? So I did, and I have never felt anything quite as shocking in my whole life that I went to kiss my granddad and he was stone cold. So my first experience of death was horrific. From being a little girl, death was something that we definitely didn't talk about or explain in any way. And it was hush hush. It was embarrassing to cry, so you don't cry in front of people. And we definitely don't include children. So when it came for me coming into ministry, I felt quite strongly about us involving the whole family in how we feel about death and illness and dying. My grandma was only 62 when she died. She died far too young. She died of septicemia, but my granddad died when he was much older. But none of it made any sense. I had to try and figure it all out for myself. I think part of that is because my mum and dad didn't know what to do. They didn't have any experience, and it had been pushed under the carpet for them as well. And when I think about when I visit families now, one of the things that they often battle with is, what about the children in the family? And they'll say, well, no, we don't want them anywhere near the funeral. So one of my questions I often say to them is, have you spoken to them about their grandma or their auntie, or whoever it may be, about them dying? And how old are the children? So, I mean, that does matter, obviously. But I think it's really important that we talk about death, and we stop pretending that it's something that doesn't happen to us. I mean, you know, like, I can't believe it's something that's so natural that we're so scared of talking about. When I came into ministry, the bit that I dreaded the most when I first went into ordination training was the funerals. So I thought, how am I going to cope with funerals? I'm going to cry at everything. I'm quite emotional. And I'm never going to be able to deal with that kind of ministry. And actually the opposite has happened. I mean, I don't laugh at them, but we do have a bit of laughter. But actually, it's a part of the ministry that I absolutely love, for all the right reasons. The pastoral side of it, whilst I was in my my ordination training, my father-in-law was ill, and he died in mine and my husband's arms, actually, and he wasn't an easy man to love. Not sure I did love him, but that's a different matter. It was horrendous when he died, when he was ill, and we were with him the day before, and we were told he'd got months and months to live, and then within hours it died. And but I remember that moment that he did die, it being one of the most beautiful things I'd ever experienced in my life, both for me and my husband. My husband was able to let go of a lot of that tension that he held with his dad. So death started off as something that I couldn't talk about because I didn't know how to even articulate it. I feared it. Something's really fearful about death because parents don't talk to you about it. And then to go on to do funeral ministry. So I think for each and every one of us here, we'll have our own experiences of life and death. And that will shape us as to how we then go on to funeral ministry with other people. Mine could have, I suppose, influenced me in quite a negative way, but I was able to use it actually to help me to. I mean, my mum will still say to me today, "Oh, I don't know how you do it, oh, Sarah. Don't know how you do it. I can't even." And I says, "Well, I know, Mum, because you didn't talk to me about it, when I was little." And I didn't blame her, but I said to her, it probably wasn't that helpful, and we should. I talked to my kids about it. I'm quite open about it, and I nearly died actually before I went into ministry. That's why I went into ministry, because I nearly died, and so was quite honest with my kids, and said, I'm critically ill. We don't know what's going to happen here, and they were little. But had I not have done that and I'd have died, then they'd have had no preparation. So I just wondered, as we're thinking about that, has anybody, if you got your own, and maybe you could talk about this on your tables, think about how that will influence you as to how you go when you're going into funeral ministry and you're going into homes where they're not sure whether to include their children, and it does. And some families want the very little, well, all of the children there, but mostly in the context I work in, they want to shield their children from that pain. But actually, children probably deal with it better. Than adults do. So, how do we feel about aging, illness, and death? I mean, where I am from as well, where I'm working now, perhaps in where I actually lived as well, the word death, we don't use the word death, that's so dark. I mean, that's just sinister. They pass on. People pass on.
Quite celestial.
So, how do we feel about death? How does it make you feel? What is your experience of death? I don't suppose many of us will experience a good death, but that's how I would have described my father-in-law's. So my grandma's was, I couldn't even, she was there, part of my life, 1 minute, and completely disappeared the next. Wherever she went, I don't know. I do now, but I didn't at the time. And she was a wonderful, positive role model in my life. To my father-in-law, who wasn't such a wonderful role model in my life, but I experienced some real beauty in his death, and him being able to, I mean, for him to say, I'm sorry, before he died, meant that it took away years of built up frustration and disappointment in him. So and that does reflect how, I suppose, how now I see funeral ministry for me as I help other people and families. I mean, it's not just and we all know that it isn't just the funeral. I work with families. I may know them before. Then there's before the funeral, then the funeral, after the funeral. There's so many aspects which we will go through. But I wonder if anybody else has got anything that they'd like to share about maybe a positive or negative experience that they've had that perhaps would maybe it's something that will help you in your funeral ministry. Maybe it's something that you will feel is a bit of a mountain to climb.
Do this in tables to start with,
do you want to say it in front of everybody, or?
My dad died. My mum wanted to walk down the aisle with all the grandchildren, and they were aged from 20 down to about 10. And they didn't want they wanted to stay within their own family group. So we walked down as a family, my brother, his, and my sister, and only hers. And I think we split off and walked through the mum in the end. But she wanted the children with her, but they didn't. Not that they didn't like her, they just wait for all of them.
Yeah.
Went down as individual family, although we were together.
I was 19 when I lost my dad, and he went to a crematorium in Sheffield. The coffin went behind the curtain, and then they opened the curtain and he wasn't there. Well, that freaked me because I wanted to know where he was, and I didn't know. That really screwed me up. But what it did for me was I made sure my children went to funerals to realise that life went on and there was always people there for them. Because I just felt it was, for me, it brought me so much.
Yeah.
And all of her grandchildren, right down to the littlest, who I think was about 6. And I'd actually met him at the hospice a couple of days before she died. And the family had obviously talked to him about it because I took him for a little walk so his mum and dad could be in the room with him. And he said to me, Granny's going to die. And I said, I know. And he said, but we'll see her again and she'll go to heaven, which I thought was interesting because although she was a very strong Christian, none of the rest of the family were. But they have, I think a lot of people who aren't religious like that idea that we'll see we can get in.
Yeah, that's right. I had a series of events. In fact, they're very closely mirror yours, Sarah, in that when the first aunt that I could remember clearly died, she just disappeared. I was 12, 13, disappeared off the map. And for the next 2 or 3 years, I was totally, I won't use the word I've normally used, messed up, in that I was scared of people dying. I thought it was one of these things that just happened. Then, when my mother died, I was actually with her when she died. We had a good relationship, but she was very, very poorly. And when she did die, like you said, it was an absolutely terrible thing to say. Marvelous, wonderful experience to be with her at that point. When my father died, we were actually estranged. But I didn't even find out about the funeral until afterwards. And then when my parents and my godchildren, they were quite poorly. The mother was quite poorly. She's still alive, thank goodness, and well now. But around that time, I remember my goddaughter, must be like 5, saying one day she came up to when we were in the park. She said, "Uncle Joe, you're old. You're older than Daddy. Are you going to die?" And that kind of brought me up sharp. And so for that reason, yeah, these things have all contributed to why I'm here today.
Mm-hmm.
Other stories as well, but basically with children, a strange thing. Annie, my goddaughter, she was the one, "Are you going to die?" And she kind of was aware of the fact her mum was very, very poorly, but she was also she had a consciousness about it. She was a very much what one of my relatives would have called an old soul, and she's still the same today. So there's so many ways, but I've seen how it can mess you up if the kids are out of it.
Yeah. In our family, with our 3 daughters, we had animals and guinea pigs, and we realised that this was a way of introducing them to death. And we used to have we got in the garden, that's where we buried them with a crop. And said thank you, God, for it. So it was like making death part of understanding of that.
Yeah. I remember the first time, so I was a children's minister at my sending church, and I think people think if you go to church, well, I mean, you do have a hope of heaven, but I was quite new into church. But a friend of mine, her daughter was very ill with CF, and she asked me if her daughter was scared of me. She was only about 6 at the time, her daughter. So she asked me if I would go and talk to her to help her. And I've never felt so inadequate in my entire life. And did get some help, and I can't remember what it's called now, the Dragonfly book.
I've got it.
Yeah. Yes. So that's when I first found that book. But what was interesting, that I was terrified of going to talk to this little girl about dying. She couldn't wait to talk to me about it. She actually wanted to really get into this conversation. She's still alive, praise the Lord. She's just got better and better over time. But I remember feeling so ill-equipped, because I thought I'd have to go in there and magic this. I don't know what she expected me to do, but actually she taught me an awful lot. This little girl taught me so much about my expectations of life and death, and so when I talk to people now in their deepest, darkest place of grief, it is really much of my time I'm trying to help them with the hope of heaven, the hope of the resurrection, and we do talk a lot. I do talk a lot about celebrating people's lives, actually, regardless of their age and why they've died, because they've been loved. Another thing that an analogy I use quite a lot is I have taken funerals of people with absolutely nobody there, because they didn't have a single friend or family member, but they had written a funeral plan. And there was me and a funeral director in the church. So really sad. This was nothing to do with COVID. They just didn't know anybody. And somebody who had spoken to me from the village had said, nobody will go to her. She was horrible. And then I'm sat with a room full of people desperately sad that a relative have died. And I can't help but thinking, how beautiful is that?
Yeah.
That you've died with all these people loving you.
Yeah.
And you loving them. What a privilege is that. You've left such a wonderful legacy. So the question that Bill
had given me today was, how do you feel about aging, illness and death? Well, and how do we contemplate the prospect of our own death? So when I was 39, my life was absolutely nice, thank you very much. I was happily married, I'd got 3 children, and I absolutely did not need God. I had it all right. I could pay my bills, I had quite a nice house, but something was missing. I'll never know quite what, well, I did know what that was. I didn't know at the time. And then I became critically ill. And I was laid in hospital, and the consultant sat on my bed and he said, "We don't know if you'll get through tonight. You are critically ill. We can't do anything else. So it's a matter of waiting." And for the first time in my life, I thought, oh, what happens then? So what will happen? What will I go to? I won't go to heaven. Well, I mean, I haven't done anything really bad, but I haven't done anything to deserve this gateway into heaven. And is there a God anyway? I don't know. I'd like to think so. And so I found myself talking to God, probably praying. I didn't know what praying to God would look like, but I found myself kind of having a little conversation saying, I'm not ready to, who's going to look after my children? Jacob, who's autistic, nobody else can talk to him like I can. And my husband, he'll never cope without me. And oh no, I'm not ready to die. Okay, God, so let me live. Let me live and I'll find out all about you, I promise. Anyway, obviously I lived and I kept my promise. I'd never felt in such a few short hours of life what that feeling of dying would be like until it came to my own. And I have quite strong views on how I would want people to celebrate my life when I've died, by the way. I want Fat Bottom Girls by Queen as I'm coming into church. And my husband's never going to go with that, by the way. So if I go before him, there'll be problems. And I want sweets arranging on the coffin so you can all have a nice sweet instead of flowers, because yeah, I'm already allergic to flowers, so don't bother with those. And yeah, and I want people to be happy, because to glory, how amazing is that? I know I'm not quite ready, but I'm not scared anymore, because when it's my time to die, then it's my time to die. And I have a totally different feeling. So I'm able to use, I suppose, some of that personal experience to try and help people in their grief. I mean, I don't tell them my story, but it's just in there, isn't it? It's part of who I am. So whether we experience things that have left us feeling quite broken, I think we need to talk about that. I think particularly before you go into funeral ministry, you need to speak to somebody about how that makes you feel. Because if you're sat with families who have just lost a child, and they are absolutely broken, you somehow have got to keep that together to be able to manage that.
Are we going to talk about people who don't share our faith and have no hope?
Is that part of the?
Yeah, it'll come up a number of times, I think. I mean, have you got an initial question you want to?
No, I just sort of think it'd be difficult to say because we have a hope. How we talk to people who don't?
I mean, I still get that. I mean, even now, even people. I mean, Michael said, "I don't want any of that religious stuff."
Yeah.
People still say that to me.
Yeah.
When I go to visit them, I don't want that religious stuff. And I've said, it's okay, I'm not religious, but Jesus is awesome. So it's going to be amazing when we talk about this. So, you know, and I think what they mean is, and I might be wrong, is a little bit like the history that Michael talked about is that real darkness and when you watch period dramas on TV, funerals were so, I mean, they were like, oh, you see the priests speaking it's of death and damnation and you're going to go to hell. And I think it's a bit, that's what people think you're going to do at their loved one's funeral. So I think that's what they mean. I think we're all spiritual and we all have hope, but it's how you bring that in. So obviously I will say to them, well, look, you know, we're having this is going to be a Christian funeral, and the liturgy, the words that I use, I have to use, but they are beautiful and they are full of hope. And I think that at the end of the service, you will have a sense feeling a little bit better.
Yep.
And so that's how I try to use that, because my experience of funerals before I knew Jesus were very different to how I feel about funerals now. So, and in fact, I used to avoid them wherever possible. So I thought they were miserable affairs. And so I do try to bring in as much celebration into it as possible, which is tricky if it's a baby. How on earth can you celebrate that? You can't. I mean, there are elements of, so I've literally carried babies' coffins into church and walked alongside families, but you learn, I suppose for me, it's been a matter of just, when I'm not sure what to say, I don't say anything. I am just there and present and be with them. Well, you know, sometimes, because I can get a lot of funerals, I often have Simon's seen, I have them lined up on my desk quite often. Sometimes I'll go a couple of months without any, and then they'll all just come flooding in. So I have a particular system which we'll talk about later on in the course about how to sort of organise that. But I am there to do a duty to that family. And I think at the end of it all, particularly if I've had a bout of them all at once, I don't know about you, Michael, because your job's very different to mine, and I don't know how you cope, but sometimes I just need to be on my own and spend some time in absolute quiet. I'm so extroverted in every way, and I love being around people, but there comes a time when I just need to sit and be and pray, read, and give some of that emotion back to God, because, I mean, I can't tell you how many times because people like to see the cassock and stuff where I am, and, you know, it's quite traditional, and my surplice is constantly covered in mascara and makeup and tears. And I pray about that, actually. I think, gosh, you know, that's somebody's life there, isn't it? Crying on me. So, it's such an honour to be part of somebody's life journey, and emotionally, yes, it absolutely takes it from me, but not at the time. I just give it to God, really. I remember a friend of mine asked me this.
Surface of the skull. There's you know, this is my job, my role now, and that helps me. I mean, I'm saying to Ian, afraid I took my stepbrother's funeral a couple of years ago, which is probably the toughest one I've done. And at the beginning of the service, I introduced myself. I said, I'm Kate, and I was Neville's stepsister, at which point my voice cracked and my eyes filled. And I went, and that wasn't meant to happen. And everybody laughed, and from then on, I was fine. But I think for me, the dress.
There have been cracks, I have to say, and croaks, particularly if I knew. I've done 2 uncles' funerals who I adored, And that was hard, but I've tried to give a lot of, you give that to God, don't you, as much as you can. I think the cracks were for me when I've done little children, because it's just, I desperately want to be hope, show hope for this family, but they're broken completely. And I was never prepared for that. So,
I did my research with bereaved parents, probably taking 300 just baby funerals. Some of the parents spoke about how the minister, the chaplain who did the funeral, their voice cracked, how much that meant to them.
Yeah.
It was like they have been touched.
They actually care.
Yeah.
They're not what they feared. And again, I have to go back to some of the things about I don't want any of this. Just what they feared was someone being sort of patriarchal, being patronising, not going through the emotions, not actually communicating with them. And so actually,
Right, okay.
that actually they are empathy, they are empathizing, they get something like that. I'm going through. So I'm doing a course in the States for clinical pastoral education at the moment, and the educator there, and apologies for the language, but this is her word, said, you don't have to have your shit together. You just need not to spread your shit all over someone else.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
You are in tears all the way through a funeral.
Yeah, that's. Yeah.
That's not going to work. Yeah.
If there's a moment where you go,
You just need to take a deep breath, don't you? And
Yeah. 2 years. Yeah.
I mean, the way you did it was just.
Yeah.
It was so compassionate.
Yeah, and I do think that you either it has to be something that you want to do. This, isn't it? You know, this is not a job, is it? It is a vocation, and so and I never knew that I would have the skills to do that. The God given, then by grace of God, don't lie, because I wouldn't have been able to do it. But and I think some of the funerals I've taken are for people that I've spent time with as they've been dying as well. So their death was expected, and they've been able to tell me a little bit about what their expectations are of their own death. And I have been amazed by people's bravery as to the fact that they're not, in fact, they're ready, ready to die. And what a massive, awesome honour it is to be alongside people. That's been younger people as well, not necessarily just older people that have died. So, sorry, go on, yeah.
I struggled for 5 years. But my mother put everything in order before she died. She had cancer. She knew she was going to die. She was in a hospice, went into a hospice, even wrote the check out and donated to the hospice for a care there and everything else. And I was quite a few years before I could understand how somebody could do that. Even down to what age she wanted, what reading she wanted, and everything. And it was only when I was on a course some years later, one of these take you as low as you can get and then take you to all heights. And the woman that took the course felt exactly the same as I did with her own mother, but she couldn't understand it either. And with talking to her, eventually I got to understand that, that is probably a good way to organise your life.
Yeah.
Leave something, we just, those were her wishes and that's what we did. But it's hard to watch somebody, write a check and give it to my sister. Yeah, that's the running money that you're going to need.
But we organise our lives so well, don't we? But then we don't want people to organise the death. I'm quite an organised person. It's a good job because my husband's chaotic. So and I have to organise him as well. And yet, if I'd have said to him when I was ill, right, we need to do this, he could not have listened. He would not have listened. He wasn't having any of it and wanted to wrap me in cotton wool then for years. Now we talk about it in a totally different way. You know, because we've, you know, of life that's happened since then. But we, I think having said that, have I got things written down? No, I've just told everybody I know that I want Fat Bottom Girls by Queen, knowing that my husband's not going to let me have that at all.
The other thought, I lost my wife 10 years ago, and she wouldn't have anything to do with it. She just didn't want to die. And, and that's how it, nothing to what she wanted or anything. She just blanked everything off. I don't want to die. Why can't it be you? Why does it have to be me?
Oh gosh, yeah.
She was 66 and I was 60.
Yeah.
I think there is an element of almost like people sometimes think that talking about these things make it happen.
Yes.
Kind of pathetic magic almost, you know, and I think that is something. It's like when you worry about something, and if you think, oh, I'm going to worry about this so hard, and I know it won't happen because I'm worrying.
Yeah.
It's this whole business about making deals.
It's not just the death, it's the grieving as well, isn't it?
So I'm going to preface everything I say by saying I'm not an academic theologian. If I think of myself as a theologian at all, I think of myself as somewhere between a narrative and a pastoral theologian. And so because of that, when I was given this delightful title, I emailed several of my sort of colleagues and friends and said, help. So, I was at Theological College with Mark Vasey Saunders, who heads up St Hildes. And so he very kindly sent me some of the slides they use for their Theology of Death lectures. So if you've been to St Hildes and you've done some of that course, you may recognise some of the content of some of the slides. Work out which way to go.
Yeah, down through work, but maybe it's you carry on. I'll see if I can persuade it. I've got the wrong screen on here because it's recording.
That's why it doesn't like
to be a screen. Right now, see, there we are.
There we go. So this is what is on the front page of the Church of England's website about funerals. It's perhaps as brief an overview as you might get. Christians believe that when we die, and don't worry about having to scribble all this down because the slides can be sent around. Christians believe that when we die, God promises that we will be with him in a wonderful place where death and pain are gone forever. Whatever the circumstances of death, these words of hope are a great comfort to those who attend a funeral. When someone dies, although we can't see the person we love anymore, Christians believe that through the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ, we will see that person again. It may be in a very different form, in a very different way. But that is the Christian hope, and that is the message everyone will hear when they come to a Church of England funeral. Now, there are various questions at various levels, theological and pastoral, that might be raised to those statements. And as we go through the course, we'll perhaps pick up some of those. But also you might want to come back to this statement and think about what you make of it. We've touched a little bit through the other sessions on what might be termed ordinary theology, as Jeff Astley terms it. That's about the kind of ideas that are out there around death. So just take a few moments and think about what images, what phrases, what metaphors crop up or might crop up when we're talking about death and a funeral. Feel free just to shout out some phrases.
Going to a better place.
Going to a better place. Passed away.
Or pain.
Yep, out of pain.
Peace now.
At peace now.
Michael earlier had, they're looking down and will be laughing.
Become an angel.
Yep,
Rolling over in the
yeah,
day.
they would be.
A lady in the market in Denmark was talking about how she told her children that their dad had come back as a bird. She'd written this book for them.
Yep.
So that's a bit. Yeah, star.
Yeah, a star, another star in heaven.
I remember when my stepmother died, her grandchildren who were very tiny, told that when he'd gone to be a cloud, which was fine until it got a really sunny day. And we had two disparate children. Where was Granny now?
So these are some that I put down. We've seen various different versions of them. I'm not going to ask you to say, because the idea isn't to rubbish anyone's belief, but just have a moment thinking which ones you might be comfortable with, which ones you're not comfortable with. And again, we will think more on some of these thoughts and ideas as we go through the course, but I think it's worth noting at the start, it's my view when we're involved in funeral ministry that we need to keep our pastoral heads firmly on our shoulders.
Yeah.
Pastorally in the service, we might want to express something of the belief that the person who has died or the family. We might want to try to reflect back something we've heard from the family. That doesn't mean we completely switch off our theological thinking. There may be boundaries that we aren't prepared to cross. I mentioned earlier Michael Perrin saying he would never have "I did it my way." Where do we draw our lines? And again, we will particularly think about that in a later session. A related reason for having done our theological homework is that where I don't think it's our role in a funeral to rubbish anyone else's theology, our job is perhaps to put that theology in the framework of the bigger picture of Christian hope. Common Worship Funeral Service has the rubric, a sermon is preached. A lot of my time I work for the Free Churches group. I was talking with a chaplain who is a member of the United Reformed Church. They said that their funeral liturgy has the instruction, sermon on the Christian hope. Interesting that it explicitly says what the sermon should be on there. But whatever the theme of our sermon, it's a reminder that the funeral is there to do more than just describe the person's life. We're to do more than eulogizing. That's quite an extended introduction, so let's get to some theology. You may have heard of the phrase lex orandi, lex credendi. It translates something along the lines of the law of prayer is the law of belief. It's basically a posh way of saying that the community's liturgical practices and the way that it worships is central to the beliefs. The Apostles' Creed is probably the oldest of the Christian creeds, developed out of something called the Old Roman Symbol, which is from around AD 150. It was used for new converts to profess their faith during baptism. In relation to death, salvation, and eternal life, there are three related phrases that come in the last part. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, the life everlasting. The communion of saints, the resurrection of the body, both of which relate to the idea of life everlasting. So starting with the communion of saints. This refers to the mystic communion between all faithful Christians, living and dead, united as one body in Christ, a community that stretches beyond time and space. The believers who came before us and the believers who will come after us. In terms of a theology of death, we are perhaps particularly thinking about God and the saints in heaven. The communion of saints tends to be stressed more in the Catholic or Anglo-Catholic tradition. Within the concept of the communion of saints, it's probably fair to say that there's more of a focus on the location of the dead and where they are now. This would be seen in the idea of seeking the intercessions of the saints, Our Lady, pray for us, and also in praying for the saints. That would be the idea of praying for souls in purgatory, which would be important to note would be different to praying to the saints. Perhaps worth noting here that saints can be multi-meaning. People will have slightly different understandings of that. The word saint obviously simply meaning holy, so it might refer to both the sort of great saints that we think of, but also just to all of those who belong to God. And lastly, in the notion of the communion of saints, we might generally think of death as a sort of friend, or at least something not to be feared. It frames death as an absolute end to relationships, but as a transformation that allows for deeper, more peaceful communion with the deceased, with the friends and loved ones, through that lens of faith as an ongoing spiritual bond. But then what about resurrection of the body? This is the belief that after death, the physical body will be restored. Note that it's not the resurrection of the dead, but the resurrection of the body. Older versions of the Creed were even more specific when they used the phrase, the resurrection of the flesh. I won't get into questions around body-soul dualism today, but it expresses the belief that our bodies will be redeemed, not discarded, and will be reunited with the soul. The resurrection of the body tends to be stressed more in Protestant traditions. Contrary to the theologies that focus on the communion of saints, there's much less interest in where the dead are now. Instead, the focus is on the final judgment, which is a closely linked concept, as the belief is that the dead will be physically resurrected and gathered to face judgment by God. Exactly what happens to the soul before the resurrection of the body opens up a rabbit hole, which we won't go down today. There's the concept of soul sleep, which expresses the idea that the soul enters a state of non-existence or unconsciousness until the final judgment and resurrection. It's a concept that's particularly associated with Martin Luther and comes quite a bit out of his polemic against the Catholic prayer to the saints. Here, again, in comparison to the communion of the saints, death might be thought of as more as an enemy, something to be defeated. Most obviously in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, when Paul writes of the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Going back briefly to that idea of lex orandi, lex credendi, we can see both of these concepts in this commendation prayer from Common Worship Ministry at the time of death. I wonder if you can pick out phrases that particularly relate to the communion of saints. Anyone want to shout out a line or two? Yeah, so let him or her pass unharmed through the gates of death, to dwell with the blessed light, in blessed light, as you promised to Abraham and his children forever.
Don't use that one.
I don't use it. I
don't use that one.
As with all the saints to inherit the eternal kingdom.
Yes. Yeah. And then also in the same prayer, we have the resurrection of the body. Accept, name into your safekeeping, and on the great day of judgment, raise him or her up with all the saints to to inherit your eternal kingdom. And you'll find that through most funeral liturgy that those two concepts are there in different ways, played out differently, and people will probably use different prayers depending on which theology fits more comfortable with you and which bit you might wish to express. So what does the Bible say about these concepts and about life after death? If there are references in the Old Testament, then they tend to be fairly tenuous, and we're often interpreting passages somewhat in light of our Christian faith and the New Testament. Most of the references to life after death in the Old Testament come in the poetic literature, often sometimes referred to as the wisdom books. That would include Job, the Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. The general sense conveyed is that God would have created a place for the dead to go, a place that's generally termed Sheol, and that's portrayed as a dark, silent, subterranean realm where all the dead, regardless of their deed, reside. That's perhaps where we get that sense of hell as being down there, as opposed to heaven there. You see that sense in Psalm 139, for example. But there's still a belief within that God's presence can be there. If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. There's also the belief, such as described in Psalm 16, that being in God's presence after death can be a blessing. You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead. You will fill me with joy in your presence. And that God can save from the pit, which is often described as Abaddon. So in Psalm 40, verse 2, he lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on rock and gave me a firm place to stand. These ideas then start to develop and change, particularly through the intertestamental period. Ideas of Sheol develop, and we had the concept of an upper and a lower Sheol. That's perhaps much more in closer to sort of those traditional understandings of heaven and hell that we have today. It's the concept in which Jesus tells stories like that of the rich man and Lazarus. Also within that period of time, there's the development of notions of bodily resurrection and of judgment for the dead that will come at the end of time. Within that idea, there is this notion of what is sometimes termed life after death. That's where we get the idea of some sort of waiting before a final judgment. We also get in that intertestamental period the idea of prayers for those who have died. You see that a bit in 2 Maccabees, chapter 12. And also within that comes the idea of judgment being a way for justice that hasn't happened on earth to be put right. So justice is strongly linked, and the vindication of the martyrs, to the notion of the resurrection of the dead. You'll see that in things like 2 Maccabees chapter 7, which is a big story about a woman losing various of her sons who were martyred. I'm going to whiz through this side, but it's worth noting that in terms of our theology, much Christian thought around death has been articulated in relation to Greek ideas, either co-opting Greek language and concepts or reacting against them and challenging them. So going back to those concepts in the Nicene Creed and the biblical text that might relate to them. In the New Testament, particularly in Revelation, we have reference to the idea of conscious post-death existence. Revelation 6, for example, describes the souls of those who've been slain because of the word of God, and how in their testimony that they called out in a loud voice, How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? So again, you see in there a link between resurrection and justice. There are also hints in other verses, perhaps most obviously in Luke, with the thief on the cross, where Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise," rather than suggesting some waiting, maybe some way different. Other verses that might be referenced in terms of the communion of saints include John 14, verses 2 and 3, and the notion of temporary dwelling places. Also a little bit there in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 with its language of believers being in Christ, and this identity providing a secure eternal future regardless of the earthly life and death. That notion of being in Christ brings us to the idea of being in union with Christ. You see that particularly in John 11, where Jesus talks about being the resurrection and the life, that anyone who believes in him will live, even though they die. Perhaps particularly also seen through Paul's writing and the idea of connecting it with Christ in life and in death. The latter part of Romans 8, perhaps being a good example of this. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor anything present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Interesting talking about when we might be affected by language. I took my uncle's funeral a couple of years ago, and my mum, so it was my mum's brother, my mum spoke about how she was absolutely fine until I read that at the beginning of the service. Connectedness with Christ is perhaps also worth noting as a part of normal Christian life. We see that in the idea of dying to self, living to Christ, another strong aspect of Paul's theology. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Again, picking up on ideas of where we see these things in our liturgy. It's very prevalent through baptism liturgy. One of the prayers over the water includes the lines, "Now send your Spirit, that those who are washed in this water may die with Christ and rise with him." I realise this is a bit of a rush through theology, so I'm nearly finished. The resurrection of the dead. There's a number, again, of references to that in Scripture that are up on the screen. I think it's important to say here that in the New Testament, the language of immortality is used only in reference to the resurrection. The resurrection is only used in relation to the resurrection of the body. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul writes, for example, "For this perishable body must put on imperishability. This mortal body must put on immortality." There's no notion of an immortal soul that will naturally survive the death of our bodies. Instead, human life requires soul and body, which will be restored at the resurrection. If we think back to some of those ordinary theologies that we touched on at the start, I'd guess that perhaps the most widely articulated theology is built on the idea as humans that we are made of two parts, of body and soul. At death, the soul departs the body and goes to heaven, whatever going to heaven might mean. Now, the Bible isn't devoid completely of soul language, but the dominant idea in the New Testament when it comes to life after death is resurrection, not disembodied life, but re-embodied life. I'd imagine that the biblical writers had different ideas of exactly what resurrection meant, but it's clearly not the same as a soul departing a body. It's about the idea of God giving us renewed embodied existence. John Polkinghorne, who is a physicist, or was a physicist and a priest, is quoted by Tom Wright in his writing about death. He said, God will download our software into his hardware until the time he gives us new hardware to run the software again for ourselves. You perhaps need to have an understanding of sort of computers and things. But the idea is there that there is a period after death when we are in God's presence, not active in our own bodies. And then after the resurrection of the body, we will once again be embodied in a new heaven and a new earth. Again, this is another rabbit hole I don't want to go down, but just simply note its existence, which is about whether salvation is related to going to heaven, or, as Tom Wright would argue, is about being raised to life in God's new heaven and a new earth. I mentioned earlier the concept of the bodily resurrection and judgment being closely linked. Again, there's various scriptural references for that here. As I said at the start, I think it's important we have our pastoral heads on when doing a funeral. Questions around resurrection and judgment may not necessarily be a source of comfort for the bereaved, depending on personal theology. That might be as much true for a practicing Christian, as well as those who don't regularly attend church, but wish for a Christian funeral. It's one of the reasons why I would question that Church of England statement at the start of whatever the circumstances of death, these words of hope are a great comfort to all who attend a funeral. Really struggle the things on this slide. I found this on a website that was looking at one particular view on salvation, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I think it's a helpful sort of framework to see in terms of time how the notion is of death and resurrection tie in. We have sort of here death, and then there are various notions of where the body, so we're going to sort of have that language might be. Then there is the resurrection, and then judgment, and then some future in the new heaven, the new earth. It's probably important to note that not all scholars agree and wouldn't agree with everything that was on there, but perhaps particularly its statement of the New Testament language for hell being Gehenna. Others would see that as much more referring to a literal place outside Jerusalem in the valley of Hinnom, which was a rubbish dump and served as an incinerator where fires were kept burning to dispose of rubbish. But that's also where some of that imagery of hell comes from. And then again, I've not spoken much about concepts of salvation. That would be another rabbit hole to depart down. This comes from that same website, which is called theologica.org.uk. But this sets out the sort of three main positions concerning salvation, which emerged in the patristic era. That's the sort of the era of the church fathers up to the 3rd century. Obviously, as with any summary table, it's a simplification and blurs subtle differences between each camp. Each view, though, would have its expression in different ways today in different parts of the church. It's probably even more complicated today, where some would question the existence of a literal hell. But I think it's a helpful summary. To return again back to ordinary theology, it's perhaps helpful to think about what might be the views held by those who we're taking funerals for in terms of salvation and judgment. I guess that the eternal conscious punishment is probably the most sort of widely held, at least in sort of common society parlance. Think about films, think about plays, think about books. And the idea, and again, we mentioned this earlier, the idea of a religious funeral being someone talking about eternal damnation and fire and judgment being there. What things are there playing in society that are shaping people's understandings and expectations of what we might be going to do or say? And I will stop there, recognizing again that I'm not a theological expert. Happy to take some questions of other people who have different thoughts and things around there, I'm sure. When Mark sent me the slides, he also sent me the reading list that they have for that module. So again, that can be sent round. So you can explore different aspects of these, and you can take yourself down any of those rabbit holes as much as you want and explore the certain aspects of that. But thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I've got a few more minutes. Questions, clarifications? Do you want to take further?
I think Phil, pick up anything that any of us have said through today, because hopefully there was a bit of a link between some of it.
One of the broad questions for me in funeral sermon is how much do or don't I put sort of theology into it? How long should it be? How complicated should it be? And I've changed over the years. I think, have you got any tips on that?
I think some of it depends a bit on, like we talked about, how long you've got in there, and partly what are the expectations, where are you? And again, we'll probably pick this up through the course. I tend to think about, when I was trained, I think people said about 600 words, which is probably about 5 minutes, probably a reasonable amount of time.
Is it about as well that people's perceptions have changed over the period of time because society has changed, that we need to be able to implement some of it, but in a word and in a way that they can understand it?
Yes, yeah, no, and I expect lots of people haven't got a formed theology, but I think that sense of what is hope. When again, interesting talking about what's a religious funeral, what's not, and where people are. So of those many baby funerals that I've taken, I've always said to people, where do you think your baby is now, if you think your baby is anywhere? And I think I've had 2 couples in that time who just said, we think this is it. There is nothing else. Most didn't have any sort of real concept. You had a lot of that, whether with Auntie Jane or they're a star in the sky or something. So I would often try to reflect some of that, and I said, but then I would also talk about the Christian understanding is that there is something beyond this life. So there's different ways to bring it in, but I think that's also about knowing where you're comfortable and what your theology is, and how to say that, as I say, without rubbishing someone else's.
And also what might be relevant as well. We can look through scripture for a passage that's going to speak to a congregation in a particular circumstance. And just for instance, if somebody's had dementia or Alzheimer's for quite some time, to read something from the Bible, from Revelation, to say that there is actually a place where there is no more pain and no more tears and confusion, might speak into a situation that people actually would like to hear. And there's plenty of examples that we could choose from, but by the same token, not thinking that we know what they need to hear in a very pastoral way.
One thing that I ask people a lot is, when it comes to the Bible passages, let people think that, well, it's not that they think, they can have a choice of any Bible passage they want. Most people don't have any idea because they say they don't know the Bible. And what I tend to do, particularly in my context, is offer a couple of Bible passages that they do know, because what I found is that it's helpful for people to feel that they didn't, oh, I do know that Bible passage. So that has some relevance in their life, and to make that Bible passage relevant in that funeral, you know, because people who have never gone to church for a church service, if you like, will know, will have heard at some point Psalm 23, or I use John 14 quite a lot, you know, and actually for them, then I always think it's helpful if we're, the language, the liturgy that we use for a funeral in common worship is given, I mean, it's beautiful. You can take bits from what you want, and we'll go into that in this, you know, as we learn. But what's wonderful about that is that they're hearing passages that, you know, that liturgy, a lot of that, they won't understand. They won't understand about it, you know. But the Bible passage, if we can use something that they're vaguely familiar with, then it brings the Bible alive for them a bit more. So, even, like I say, even people that have never gone to church, it does mean that you have to try and keep fresh what you're saying, because you can end up saying the same thing quite a lot. But you have to remember that. But for that particular congregation or group of people, they've never heard it before. So it's about keeping something you know, relevant and fresh for us, even if we feel we're saying it over and over again.
I think at the back of, and I know this may sound strange, but sometimes I feel that a funeral can actually be an evangelical experience. In terms of it may bring people to Christ who may not have considered it before. Those Bible, the scriptures that we use in a funeral, can often be very that awareness of, I've heard this before, I know this, and also the message in them is often, I think, a very important dictating point as to whether somebody walks away after the funeral and thinks, oh my goodness, that was horrible, or you know, that scripture was terrible, was terrifying, or whether that scripture is really hopeful and I want to find out more.
I would like to think that none of us send anybody home terrified of the scripture.
I have experienced funerals where some of the scriptures that I have heard have been a bit on the heavy side, shall we say.
And these are things we'll pick up on, but for me, and this again comes out to some of my research, which is about the importance of the pastoral and good pastoral balance is in of itself evangelistic.
Yeah.
People go, this person cared.
Yeah.
They want to find out more.
Yeah.
So I had asked the chaplains who had taken some of the different services and the funerals that I was interviewing people about to send me the liturgy. And I looked at some of them and I was like, I couldn't say that.
Yeah.
But it had clearly been meaningful for the person who had it. And I think there's something about being within your own integrity. Because actually, there's a level where I could say, you know, you could read the Magna Carta, you could read Harry Potter, because particularly in bereaved parents, none of what you say is really going to go in because they're not in that state. But actually, if they realise that the person was caring, that's what lands in that.
Yeah.
Just about out of time. Mark, do you want to summarise briefly anything from what you've been doing that you want to emphasise or underline?
I don't think I want to summarise anything for here, but I think what struck me through all of the sessions, I think, is the real value of the journal for you. Think about your theology, think about your experience, thinking about the funerals as you go to see different ones of what do I like about this? Now, what theology is being said here? What am I hearing? Writing things down about what readings are used, but also that sense of how has this left me? What did I need to do afterwards? So when I was working in a parish, I knew I always needed to go afterwards and find a large cup of tea before particularly if I'd been invited back to the family, Partly because I didn't drink much beforehand, because the last thing I wanted was to feel I needed to go to the toilet whilst I was waiting. So there's a whole series of practical things. And then you would turn up and inevitably be the best china and a small thing. So, but just thinking about your own emotional and spiritual needs and how you deal with that. What did you find you needed to do after? Because when you are then taking on more heavy emotional things, that's going to be what sustains you through that. So I think really make use of the journals. I would encourage.
I was just thinking, you could have be on your way home from this has happened to me so many times. I'm on the driving home from a funeral that's been really hot, really, really tough. Some of them are, not tough, just emotionally really tough. And then the phone call will come in, it'll be my husband, and I'll say, right, can you just call off that butcher's and just get me something? And then, we haven't got any bread, and I'm like, no, did you just go away?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Barb, and he'll put the phone down. I'm thinking, it's just being back in that reality of world again. Sometimes you're not quite ready. And it's how do you do that?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. And as Mark's flagged once or twice, there's a number of things we've raised today, which we'll come back to in the course, because there's, today's an introduction, but there's more that can be said about a number of these things. So thank you very much. So thanks everyone for being here. Special thanks to you three for being here and for your input. That's really appreciated. I'll send, if I can add a PDF of these slides, that would be an obvious thing to do, wouldn't it? Along with, once we've got the recording in shape, then I'll send you an email with details of how to access the recording, because even if having been here, you may well want to revise something, and along with that, we'll put the PDF with it. And so we gather again online on the 4th of November. Let's make that clear. Tuesday, isn't it? 4th, not the 5th. That's for other eventualities, parties, excitements. So the evening of the 4th, and we'll make it 7:15 on the 4th. So I'll send you Zoom link, and I'll put it all in the same email. That makes sense. Zoom link for the 4th of November. And let's just take a moment just to pause and maybe see if is there one particular best bit of this morning for you. There's been an awful lot of stuff to reflect on, but is there one bit that particularly lands with you from today? If so, just jot it down so you don't lose it, and see if you can identify that. And if you have found one thing, then just maybe take that to God in prayer for a moment and offer that to God, seeking the way to go forward with that question or that insight. And so let's pray for ourselves and for each other. Maybe pray especially for the one on your right and the one on your left. And we'll use the words of the grace. Join those if you know them. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.